Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A couple of hours ago, I was told that I'd be moderating today's virtual launch of the second volume of Rav Dovid's groundbreaking work on Rav Chaim Ozer. You've all seen the first volume, and suffice to say, this is the project that doesn't just document history, but brings to life the leader of interwar Jewry in the diaspora, aptly spelled out in the title Raban Shel Kol Bnei Hagola. Before we begin, a heartfelt thanks is due to the Rebbitzin, the entire Kamenetsky family for the support of this monumental endeavor. To Professor Shel Stampfer, Yehuda Geber, and Eliezer Brodt for their partnership in organizing this event, and to the many individuals who've worked tirelessly over the past few months with Dovid, and well before that, to help bring this volume into the world, a couple of whom you'll hear from during this 1 hour program. For Dovid, this work isn't just about documenting history, it's very personal. He once shared with me how he grew up with the story about how his grandfather, of Yaakov, was offered the chance to serve as Rav Chaim Ozer's assistant in Vilna. Ultimately, he turned the position down, but the connection was there, planted deep. And maybe that's why, decades later, his grandson would return to that story, not to fulfill it, but to preserve it, to give our generation and the next a window into the world of one of Klal Yisrael's greatest leaders. Today, we get to walk through that window together. We are going to have 4 speakers, and then we have one speaker who sent a message, which is going to be read. We're going to start with the Rosh Hashiva, Dovid's brother, Rav Shalom Shlita.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. It's an amazing thing. What Zoom could do today is really, it's really something special. Whatever chizuk could give to us would be very much appreciated. You know, it's interesting that the personal shaykhs that I have, as funny as it sounds, is another connection. My father-in-law is Rav Shalom Kagan, whose mother was a niece to Rav Chaim Ozer. Rav Yitzchak Kosovsky, Rabbi Shel Johannesburg in South Africa, was a brother-in-law to Rav Chaim Ozer. And indeed, you know, there's a connection in the family. We've heard a lot of stories, got a lot of connections to things in the past of, you know, to Rav Chaim Ozer. I feel, and again, there's a letter here that I want to just share with you, which I think sums up who he was. You know, the Igros Rav Chaim Ozer that preceded my brother's work, a lot of interesting letters over there. I spoke to my brother about them as well, to Rav Dovid. But there's one letter that took me in particular. Chelik Aleph Tov Kuf Yud, where he was asked the question, you know, everyone knows the background about the argument, the Machlokes, the Shem Shemaim of Rav Bamberger and Rav Shamshavel Hirsch, in the Gemeinde in Germany, to cede or not to cede, as well known. The question was asked of Chaim Ozer whether or not, at this point, seeing that all the Tnoim that the Reform had actually, you know, said they're going to keep, pertaining to many of the Yisodi Adas and Yiddishkeit, should be at this point should cede, because we see that they hadn't kept the word. That was the question asked of Chaim Ozer. His response is fascinating. We quote a few words over here, just how he responded. You see his approach bichlal to how he, you know, as great as he was in leadership. Okay. You just quote a few lines out of Rav Chaim Ozer's response, and he says as follows: Hineni lahagid liyedidi rum ma'alis kvoit terasa. My desire is indeed to respond to you and answer your question about the Gemeinde in Germany. What you've asked me to do now is difficult. And he says, I can't answer part of this question without touching the core of the question. And there's a question that we say that the Rabbanim Agdolim at Tzadikim, he writes, Rav Shamshavel Hirsch and Rav Bamberger fought about, and that you're not asking about. You're asking about a practice question. And he goes on and says, let me tell you something about the Iker Shaila. This isn't a psak like you have in Hayros Iser Veheter. He says, this isn't a question even of difficult agunas. The most chomer the Keshailas. The basis to responding in agunas, he says, is pasuach b'shas u'poiskin. He says, of course, there's a Shulchan Aruch for all of us, there's Makaris for all of us. We're trying our best to figure out what to do in a particular difficult aduna shayla. And responds, Loi Kain Pisraim She'elazu. When it comes to this question here, it's wrong. You say Doisag Biyichud Bahakara Gemura Ubashkofa Behira Ladas Eza Derech Yishara Ligdar Geder Lamed Beperetz Lachazik Hadas. You need to be fully aware with a clarity and know exactly what's the correct path going forward to fix a pirza, to mechazik the das. And he says, Ein sofik be'enai shalei nechleko rabbonim hatzadikim reino Rab Shimshon Fal Hirsch v'arid Bamberger Zal v'yiroes v'dinim. They had many, many places where they agreed when it came to Shulchan Aruch and Piskei Halacha. Their approach was different, and they understood l'shem shamayim. And he goes on. He says a few gedorim. He says, "Va'asher hashkofa zu meira b'yosel l'chacham hamakir es v'koimoy hachai v'dor b'oisei golul v'kihilo." To understand questions such as this appears to be Gidron Shel Yisrael, it's the chacham who lives there. He knows the place. Mekoyim, he's there, living there. Yeidea kol tchunas anshe hakilu prateim. He knows the nature of the people living there in detail. Kosher itom cholanim in hamekashim. And indeed, he's connected with them, with all the strands that connect him with that community. Mifakeach al tzarcheim. Indeed, he's involved in looking and trying to figure out, understanding of their needs. Loi ayin boichen losul lei be'iyun ve'itev b'mishalas adas. He is the one that has the right to look into this and understand. And he also knows what's there, the nature of the question, the nature of the issue, the nature of the pirza, and how to respond to the people there to know what exactly will this bear going forward. What will be born from this, he says. And he speaks so beautifully, he says, therefore, this question wasn't asked to the Gedolei Yisrael that were there at the time. So the Malbim was around, Yisrael Salantri was around, Meryl Diskin was around, Yitzchak Ochon was around. These are Gedolei Yisrael. He says there are no Mekoros in Chazal, Poiskim, Shas, Lakapi Svora, Yishora, Vashkof, and Nechoina Meira. It's an amazing thing, and he continues in this, and he speaks out the love of Torah, love of Chaim, and the way he goes through this in detail of who they were and why we have no right to answer. And just sit and contemplate for a moment. Raban Shel Kol Bnei Hagolah that Rav Chaim Ozer was. Not limited to Vilna itself, obviously. Nonetheless, he fully understood that when it comes to questions in places that is not his expertise as to knowing the nature of the Shaila. My Zayder Rabbi Yaakov used to say, one never answers a Shaila, one answers a Shoyel. You don't answer a question, you answer the questioner. And these inyanim over here, to look for something which is not clear, la'alocha, tzashkofa sachaim, how to approach certain inyanim. Obviously, it mirrors, it comes through somewhat related, intertwined with divrei halacha. But their place in divrei halacha and Tide come together. But it's a davar pashut that Rav Chaim Ozer understood his place. Im gadlusai, im tkifosai, im chizukai, with everything that he was and understood as achrayis Klal Yisrael. But he was the first to say, when it's something that I don't know, first say I can't really know for sure what's happening in that particular city. He says, I won't even try to answer that. He looks historically and he says, I won't involve myself in something that it's not my forte. There's politics, there's understanding the issues, understanding what goes on there. Nonetheless, he walked away. That's emes gadlus. Gadlus to be Raban Shel Kol Bnei Hagolah, and understanding where one does and doesn't interfere, where one does or doesn't get involved. That's emes gadlus. I think that's the Moshe to teach us what it means to be an Adam Godel, and understanding that to understand it, to deal with the Shaila, one has to properly know the inside, the core issue of what's being dealt with. It's something I think that goes through, it's almost a common theme that takes us through everything Rav Chaim Ozer has done and wrote. Rab Dovi, I think I've done my time. I think that should be sufficient. I can't thank my brother enough for giving us the opportunity to seeing it's a little bit of some kind of aspect, clarity, some kind of insight into understanding this Adam Gadol.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Rav Yaakov Trevitz, is somebody who really has devoted significant time to making this project come to fruition the last couple of months especially, and ask him to say a few words. Let me Menachem already, I think, unmuted him.
Can I speak? Everybody can hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much, Reb Dovid and Dovi Safier, and Birshus, everybody. I hope you won't mind if I'll speak in Hebrew, because that's much more comfortable for me. Okay, so I'll speak in Hebrew. So thank you again. Thank you to all of the me'argenim, and of course to Professor Stampfer for Yozem HaRayon, Yisher Koyach. Okay. Toiv ein u yevorach. In this pasuk, again, I'm going back to Hebrew. בפסוק הזה רציתי לפתוח את הדקות הספורות שנתנו לי לדבר מעל גבי במה מכובדת זו. זוויות רבות יש לו למחקרו של רב דוד, ואני רוצה לדבר על נקודה אחת מביניהם. מחקרו של רב דוד מאופיין בטובת עין. מניסיוני בעולם המחקר, רב דוד הינו חוקר יוצא דופן וכמעט יחיד במינו. אני מדבר על טוב עינו הנדירה, זו שמשתפת את כל מי שמבקש. מחקר, כתבי יד, דפוסים ישנים וכדומה. כל דבר שרב דוד אסף במשך השנים בעמל רב, הוא משתף בשמחה רבה כל חוקר ומתעניין. אין לך ספר שיצא בעשרות שנים האחרונות הנוגע במישרים ובעקיפין, בווילנה, בדמותו של הגאון מווילנה, בכתביו, בבית מדרשו, שאינו מוקיר תודה לרב דוד ששיתף עמו, או חלק איתו את מחקריו, מקורותיו, כתבי היד שברשותו, וכו' וכו'. אני חושב שזהו חלק מהותי ואינטגרלי מאופן המחקר שלו, שהוא דרישה וחתירה אל האמת, חשיפה של האמת ללא משוא פנים או צנזורה. האמת שייכת לכולם, ראויה היא לכולם, ואמורה להיות גלויה לכל אחד ואחד. דמותם של גדולי ומאורי האומה הישראלית הוא נושא ללימוד. כמו שחז"ל אמרו, גדולה שימושה של תורה יותר מלימודה. כשם שאנו מעיינים ומתעמקים בתורתם, כך אנו צריכים להתייגע בלימוד אישיותם ופעולתם. שבוע שעבר נתבשרנו על ספר חדש שיצא לאור, רבינו חיים אויזר, רבן של כל בני הגוילו, חלק שני. אני רוצה קצת לספר מאחורי הקלעים על הספר הזה. לפני כחצי שנה בעת ביקורי בביתו של רב דוד כמנהגי מפעם לפעם מאז נתגלה בראשו הגידול הארור, שאלתי ולדה ועלהה ובמה הוא מתעסק בימים אלה. רב דוד פירט בפניי את תוכניותיו ואת הפרויקטים השונים שהוא עסוק בהם, ביניהם הוא הזכיר שעומד בסיום השלמת החלק השני של ספרו הביוגרפי על רב חיים אוזר. החלק הראשון יצא לאור ב-2020 בשתי הדפסות, ותוך 3 שבועות לא היה ניתן להשיג עוד עותק נוסף. רב מחר לכל הדעות, וזאת בעוד מגיפת הקורונה הכתה גלים. מאז עבד רב דוד להשלים את החלק השני מתוך 3 ולהביאו לדפוס. הצעתי אז את עזרתי בנימוס, אך רב דוד סירב ואמר שיסתדר לבד ומעולם לא ביקש עזרה. לאחר כחודש הפצרתי בו שייתן לי את החומר ואערוך אותו לדפוס. אז השיב רב דוד בחיוב ומסר לידי את כל החומר שברשותו. הוא ציין שיש בידו עוד פרק או 2 שעדיין לא סיים לכתוב, אבל כך הוא הגיש לי את החומר. תכף חיפשתי עורכים לשונים ולא קלה הייתה המלאכה. העורכים הסתבכו עם מבול של מלל והתקשו לסיים את העבודה. כך עברו להם כמה חודשים קריטיים, עד שלאחרונה החלטתי לשנס את מותניי ולעבור במהירות המרבית על כלל החומר ולהזדרז להתקדם לקראת עימוד והדפסה, וברוך השם שבוע שעבר המלאכה הסתיימה. אני רוצה להגיד כמה מילים על הספר עצמו. כל מי שיעבור על הספר ייבהל ויתפעל מעוצמת העבודה הכבירה של רב דוד. מלאכה שיש עימה חוכמה גדולה. ליקוט ואיסוף חומרים בצורה שרק רב דוד יודע לעשות. במקום אחד רב דוד מציין שהוא עבר על כ100,000 מסמכים עבור חיפוש מקורות לנושא אחד בלבד בספר, ועד הישיבס. אי אפשר שלא לציין את אלפי העיתונים שעברו תחת ידו, רובם בשפת היידיש, כאשר החשובים והמשמעותיים מביניהם לצורך הספר תורגמו על ידו לעברית מדוברת. מודעה אחת שכמדומני לא ידועה, בעיתון רב דוד מצא שבאחר שבוועידת סן רמו ב-1920 הכלילו במנדט הבריטי את הצהרת בלפור, רב חיים אויזר חתם על הכרזה בכל בתי הכנסת ובתי המדרש בווילנה לומר את הפרקים בתהילים של הלל הגודל אחר שחיס בתפילה בשחיס, בתפילה בשבת, בשחיס. יש דבר מרענן וחשוב בספר לעומת ספרי ביוגרפיה קלאסיים של גדולים. אין כאן אסופת סיפורים על פי נושאים כמו טוירו, חסד, אסקונוס וכדומה. אין כאן אסופת סיפורים בכלל. יש כאן תיאור כרונולוגי של התקופה כשמתמקדים בהשפעתו של רב חיים אויזר אלה. מדובר כאן על אחת התקופות המשמעותיות ביותר לעם היהודי בכלל ולאורתודוקסיה החרדית בפרט. ייסוד אגודת ישראל העולמית, בו רב דוד גם חושף התכתבויות בין רב חיים אויזר לרב יצחק אייזק הלוי מתוך הארכיון שלא התפרסם עדיין, תיאור של הכנסייה הגדולו בשנת 1923, ועד הישיבס, פרק מאוד מיוחד על העיתון של רב חיים אויזר, דוס וורט, עם ליקוט עצום של ידיעות מעניינות שהתפרסמו בו, וכלה בשאלת הרבנות בווילנה, מחלוקת ענקית שיצרה לדעת רבים את הסדק הראשון שבין החרדים למזרחי. לאורך הספר ניכר שלמרות הפולמוסים הרבים שרב חיים אויזר עבר, רב חיים אויזר כתב רק לגופו של עניין, ומעולם לא יצא נגד מישהו ספציפי ברבים. תמיד לאחר שוך הפולמוס ידע רב חיים אויזר להסתדר עם כל הצדדים, להגיע לפשרות ולהבנות בין הצדדים השונים. מתוך הספר עולה דמותו של רב חיים אויזר המשקפת באופן המילולי ביותר את הביטוי רבן של כל בני הגוילה. זה השם של הספר, רבן של כל בני הגוילה. לא כגוזמה, לא כפרפרזה למשמעות אחרת, אלא כפשוטו. כל ענייני הציבור, התמיכה בעולם הישיבות, האידיאולוגיה וההנהגה של הקהילה האורתודוקסית החרדית באירופה כולה ואף מחוץ לה, עברה תחת ידיו של רב חיים אויזר. יש לספר הזה חשיבות יתרה בחשיפת דרכי פעולותיו של רב חיים אויזר, לדור שלנו המתמודד עם בעיות דומות. רב דוד כדרכו נותן למציאות עצמה לספר את הסיפור. כך עושה רב דוד בכל מחקריו, וכך הוא עושה גם כאן בספרו זה בהצלחה רבה. ספרו זה כקודמו מצטרף למוניטין הגדול שרכש לעצמו רב דוד ביושר בפרסומם של עשרות מאמרים פורצי דרך. אני רוצה לאחל בזה מזל טוב לרב דוד ומשפחתו היקרה, וקריאה מהנה ומחכימה לכל כלל אחינו בייס ישראל. תודה רבה רב דוד ספייר על רשות הדיבור.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear next from Rav Yehuda Horowitz, who perhaps is known for his work on Erech Loner, but was also involved in his project, especially the first volume. So, Menachem, if you could unmute Rav Yehuda, or he can unmute himself. I'm not even sure how this works.
Yehuda also did the index of this second volume too.
Okay. Much appreciated. Thank you. Should be Eliezer Brodt, who needs no introduction to anybody here. I think he's been a light into all of our lives, and he's someone that we all appreciate, especially I know of Dovid, and also worked very hard the last couple of months to help this project come to fruition. So, Eliezer, the floor is yours.
For many years, Dovid has devoted himself to researching and publishing numerous aspects of Lithuanian Jewry, especially Yerushalayim Delita, Vilna. His work spans from the Vilna Gaonis Talmidim to the publication of their important manuscripts and much more. I'm speaking today as a small expression of my Akaras HaToiv for his generous assistance on my own research on Vilna and Lita over the years. He has graciously shared his knowledge and material Kisveyah, just like Rav Trevitz just mentioned, whether it's related to the Gra, his son, Reb Avram, the Talmud Adam, the Chai Adam, the Netziv, and many other important figures and topics. Just to cite one example, a while ago, while working on publishing a book about the Aruch HaShulchan from Rav Eitam Henkin's Hashem Yinkom Damei's writings, I was seeking a good, clear, authentic picture of the Aruch HaShulchan for the cover. Of course, Reb Dovid in his collection, and he was more than happy for us to use it. In December 2020, the first volume of Dovid Kamenetsky's comprehensive study on Rav Chaim Ozer came out. It's about 680 pages. It's supposed to be multi-volume, and Baruch Hashem, last week, volume 2, 720 pages came out. And volume 1 was also recently republished, which had been out of print for many years with typographical corrections. I have a personal hakaras hatov for this special project of Reb Dovid on Rav Chaim Ozer's life, as my grandfather, Rabbi Leib Spitz, was zeicha to be close with Rav Chaim Ozer back when he was in Vilna. Rav Chaim Ozer was the main address for Lithuanian Jewry before World War II and was involved with everything, big or small, for Klal Yisrael. One could get a small glimpse of how the Torah world looked at him from the passages in the recently beautifully published autobiography of Reb Chaim Stein of Telz, his wartime experiences. He writes, he basically describes that they found out the terrible news. Asan gadol karet mo bad Yehuda Kula, misvakesh goin umanig hadar maran Rav Chaim Ozer b'yeshiva shamayla. And then he talks about it, going to the Levaya, the various Hespedim, and then at the end he writes, "V'chazarnu hergashnu kulanu ki mamish ki yisayim nesharnu vein avu manig ad sha achroina ha'isa daitet slula v'dog l'toivus haklal." So everyone knows his name. His name has not been forgotten. However, his legacy of exactly what he did, his shitas, this has not been set out properly, although there's different articles, and this Reb Dovid Kamenetsky, through years of research, set out to remedy. One could only describe this work as a labor of love, where Reb Dovid set out to document everything, but not only Reb Chaim Ozer's life, but every parsha that he was involved with in European Jewry for over 50 years. Along the way, he documents the story of many other Gedolim, some with lengthy footnotes, other with special appendixes. As Reb Dovid writes already in the introduction of Volume 1, Nekapsu tachas yadi asoreis alfei michdavim mismachim mamarim kisvei eis usfar makshurim l'Rabbeinu. If one spends just a few minutes with the Sefer, you can see that this is no exaggeration. It's full of different documents from all different archives, many of which were never published before, that he collected from all over the world. In Volume 2, on page 457, at the outset of the chapter of his on Vadi Yeshivas, he writes that most of the archive of the Vadi Yeshivas is still around at Evo. He describes going through it, I think Rav Trevitz also mentioned this, of over 100,000 documents to piece together the story of the Vadi Yeshivas and Rav Chaim Ozer's involvement. In chapter 9 of Volume 2, which is devoted to the newspaper Das Wort, he documents the story based on going through hundreds of the issues of the newspapers. All this wealth of material can help one learn and dive deeper into the history of European Jewry before the war. Just to mention two cute stories of details buried in these volumes related to Rav Chaim Ozer. A while ago, I was working on various Gedolim reading newspapers, especially the Netziv, and I fell into a rabbit hole of other Gedolim who also read newspapers. A Talmud of Rav Ruderman told me, in Rav Ruderman's name, how Rav Ruderman witnessed Rav Chaim Ozer reading the newspaper every day. So while talking with Rav Dovid once in Hebrew University about it, he said, "Of course." And he shows me, come to look at my computer. He digs up a folder with a bunch of beautiful pictures of Rav Chaim Ozer sitting there reading the newspapers. One could see one such picture in Volume 2, page 550. Another story, which was already played out buried in a footnote in Volume 1. While working on Ramatisyo's Strashon and his library and figuring out who visited it, who used it, I came across a very cute story. The story was Ramosha Shmukler Shapiro, who was famous for writing about Volozhin. He was he was born in Volozhin, and he was there when Volozhin was closed at the age of 12. And he saw the Netziv crying, and this passage has been quoted by many. So he was in Vilna working on a biography on Rav Chaim Volozhiner. So he used to visit Rav Chaim Ozer often, and he heard, they always used to say, he says that Rav Chaim Ozer had a nice library, a lot of different not typical Sfarim, but they said about Rav Chaim Ozer that he knows everything. So he decided, he's a young guy, he's going to test Rav Chaim Ozer. So what does he do? He goes to the Strashon library, he orders up a rear tshuva sefer, looks up a tshuva, and then he goes, next time he's by Rav Chaim Ozer, he goes back and he says, "Well, what about this in the Shaila?" Rav Chaim Ozer goes, "Yeah, it's open Maimon Mordechai," which was the tshuva that this rare tshuva sefer that he had ordered up in the Strashon library. Okay, So of course we know Rav Chaim Ozer knew everything. So I was talking to Reb Dovid about this. How did Rav Chaim Ozer know this rare svarim? It wasn't in his collection. So he says, "What do you mean?" He has a bunch of letters that he collected over time between Chaim Lunsky, the famous librarian of the Strashon library, where Rav Chaim Ozer would borrow books from most people. Almost no one was allowed to take a book out of the library, but I think Rav Chaim Ozer had special connections, and basically he would write a letter with his request, and Dovid had in his collection a few. One or two were published in volume 1, and that's how he borrowed books from the Strashon library. Anyway, this is just two small little details buried somewhere in these farms. There's thousands of details and longer stories that you could use from the sugyas that Rav Dovid was makatzer and all these things, which I'm sure is going to be used for the next many, many years by all different types of people. We owe Rav Dovid an incredible hakaras hatov for all the years that he spent spending time going through, traveling the world and spending all the time in all the archives everywhere. One time I remember he sent me an email which was around the time when he discovered the picture of the passport of Rav Chaim Ozer, how he's excited that now he had a new date for the birth of Rav Chaim Ozer, possibly in this rare archive, etc., etc. There's many different, even the little detail stories besides for all the greater stories that are all told of Lithuanian Jewry, which has even till today has not been properly told. And hopefully others will continue with other aspects of this legacy of Lithuanian Jewry. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Eliezer. I think we have Yehuda Horowitz now, and we look forward to hearing from him.
Thank you. Now?
Loud and clear, we hear you.
Yes. Should I speak now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I came in a bit late. I didn't have the link. First of all, a big mazel tov to my dear, I would say, Talmid Chover, Reb Dovid Kamenetsky Shlita. We know each other for a few, I don't know how long, definitely 2 decades, more, few decades. My first association was when I began working with Yeshurun, when it was founded in New York. At that time, I lived in New York. But along the years, I learned to appreciate the, first of all, multi-talented work of Reb Dovid. And as we all more or less come from the same, I would say, I won't say school of thought, but we all come from the Litvische world, the Litvische yeshivas. And what I could learn from him is how to use, I think, the special, I would say, the Brisker methodology or the Brisker derech in research, when you try and unpeel all the, what you call in Hebrew, Rashei Reka. When you start writing, there's a bit of a problem here, because when you're writing Magdolei Israel, on the one hand, we have all the Avas Torah and love and Munas Chachomim, and we treat it with Dusha V'Tara, and on the contrary, want to learn from them. And Chas v'Shalom, in no way do we do research, I would say, like very academic, that you take this Godel and dissect him. Obviously, we have the Chazon Ish, you have to learn the characters and maybe also analyze it, but all be covered. And in this sense, I think what the contribution of Reb Dovid's research gave a very strong, meaningful significance to that type of research. When you talk Magdolei Israel, you want to not rely all the time on all sorts of rumors and stories and wishful thinking and dreams. And hence, I would say this volume, on these 2 volumes on Chaim Ozer, is a result of that. That first and foremost, you want to go to the actual written material, written documents that are more than a testimony. That's the actual material you want to use for purposes of research. and then you are less prone to rely on all sorts of assessments and ideas that come from more wishful thinking and dreams. So this is a very important point that I wanted to make. That going through this book, the Sefer, I think it's more of a Sefer because you can learn. It's actually, when you think of it, it's the writings of Rav Chaim Ozer with introductions and explanations. But more or less, it's about Rav Chaim Ozer. But this is actually, it's not the Eliezer, but it's the Torah, the Eliezer on Hanogas Haklal. It's a Sefer Limud, how the Eliezer touched up, how he learned his leadership role in the sense of a Godel Batorah, how he leads, how he responds to all sorts of things in his leadership, in his role as a leader. And therefore it's more, I wouldn't call it a book, it's a Sefer Mamash that you can learn and study, and especially all the writings here, the Kisvei Yad, taken, culled from thousands of documents, taken out, obviously those more relevant ones, but this is a mamish, a Sefer Limud, and I would say many of the articles of Reb Dovid and Sforim, and that's besides the hundreds, or I don't know how many times that Reb Dovid helped other people, helped me, helped so many people in all fields of publishing and editing. More the kula mamish kula bay. In this sense, you can talk for hours. But I'm talking mamish of the products of Reb Dovid himself that he published in all sorts of places, in Yeshurun himself, and how he. One example I took from him is that Afloa. And I won't go into the details if Afloa was a Chassid or not a Chassid, was a Rebbe, wasn't a Rebbe. That's not the point. The point is, how do you go to research it? How do you write about it? And here, it's also an example. You go to the Pinkus of Frankfurt, you go to the writings of Afloa himself, you go to things that are written, and that's the raya. You don't go to storybooks, which are very nice and very important also. That's a different genre. But here we're talking about to learn from Gedolei Yisrael, and see how they themselves wrote about themselves, more or less. So this is a very important point when we talk about the work of Rav Dovid Kamenetsky, which is very, very important, because here we have 100% limud, the way he learns a sugya. In Bobby Kamer, that's the way he touches up and learns the history and the Gedolei Yisrael, how they worked. So that's a very important point. And besides that, and this is already another point, the knowledge of Reb Dovid, that it's a oni b'mokem echad v'osher b'mokem acher, and I and many people that like even paraphernalia, that means things that people collect on Gedolei Yisrael, all sorts of like pictures, things like that. It's a pleasure, because when you talk to Rav Dovid about even pictures of Gedolei Yisrael, the wealth of information and knowledge that he amassed, all these years of being interested and collecting information on these things, it can help anyone in any field almost. So I want to wish Reb Dovid, definitely deserves a big wish of refuah shlema and atzlocha and arichas yomim v'shonim, and many more Be'ezrat Hashem, Be'ezrat Hashem, many more years of fruitful research, Be'ezrat Hashem. Ad bias hagoel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Yehuda. I'm going to quickly read a message from our dear friend, Reb Professor Schneur Lyman, followed by, we do have time for another speaker. So Yehuda Geber, you've been asked, as well as the Yonason Rosenblum, who was not asked in advance, but if you want to grace us with a couple of minutes, just write to me in the chat. Would be much appreciated. I know that today is a day of celebration, even as I write from New York, and I have not actually seen a copy of Rav Chaim Ozer Raban Shel Kol Bnei Hagolah Volume 2. I have, of course, read Volume 1 from cover to cover, and continue to learn much from it. Our teacher and colleague, Rav Dovid Kamenetsky, has devoted his life to publishing the Torah of the Rishonim and the Achronim. But clearly, his magnum opus is this multi-volume study of Rav Chaim Ozer. The Tzad Hashava of all of his publications is his focus on emes. You go where the evidence takes you and nowhere else. No hagiography, no bobomaisis, no asher b'alma. Only emes la'amitoi. Rav Chaim Ozer in particular had a Viking cook, a far-seeing vision. Like a master chess champion, he could see 50 moves ahead and more. Many could not understand his moves at the time, but every one of them was calculated to serve the needs of Klal Yisrael, and indeed to save Klal Yisrael for destruction. Thank you, Rav David, for teaching us how deeply indebted we are to Rav Chaim Ozer for saving Am Yisrael when his very existence was in jeopardy. We wish you bracha v'atzlacha, and you be zeicha to complete volume 3. Behakara, Shner Lyman.
Well, I don't really, amongst all these scholars, I really don't feel that I have anything to contribute. I mean, I wanted to hear the scholarly opinions of so many people who sat in the National Library with Dovid all these years and had the opportunity to work with him and see what he was about. And certainly this book is, if David Amelech could say "Ani Tefillah Si," then this is David's work. I spoke the other night at the beautiful Misibah that Rav Chaim Kamenetsky arranged for David with some of his close friends in Har Nof, and I don't want to repeat what I said there, but there was one story about Rav Chaim Ozer, since Rav Shalom started with the tshuva from Rav Chaim Ozer, which I think really is ma'afyan Rav Chaim Ozer, but I just want to mention something that is another aspect of himself, his ability to put himself in the position of, as Rav Yaakov said, you answer according to the Shoel. That one time they came to Rav Chaim Ozer and told him that a shoemaker in Vilna had lost a child. He had a large family and death was common, but he lost a child, and Rav Chaim Ozer was overcome with grief, tears, crying about this Maisa. Now I'm in the Indian of Maisalak. I just heard this story from a Rebbe of mine, so maybe it's not Baduk Lagamri, but it sounds like everything that I've ever heard about Rav Chaim Ozer. They asked him, people were surprised. They said, when your only daughter, who was Nifter, she was bit by a rabid dog, she was engaged, and before you kept your poise, you were still answering shuvas. When she was a goses, you said, the people who sent the shilas, they still need to answer the fact that my daughter is in this is al-asaf, they still need the shuvas. You were poised. You didn't break down in this kind of tears. So why, in this case, did you? He said, I'm not crying for myself. I'm crying for the shoemaker. When my daughter was taken away, I knew that she was going to a world that was kuli tov. I knew she was going to a better place, so I could console myself with that knowledge. But I don't know that this shoemaker has that same clarity that I had. And then think of what the grief would be without anything of a similar nature to console you. This sensitivity to another human being, to every other human being, wherever they were holding, just it's something that made Rav Chaim Ozer not only was he held in awe by every contemporary, in absolute awe, but he was beloved. There was nobody who didn't love him, and to bring him to life, to bring all those aspects of him to life, as Rav David has done, is such a great service, such a great limud for all of us. And the completion of the second volume is a simcha, not just for Rav David, not for the family, for friends, but it's a simcha for all Klal Yisrael. And Bezrat Hashem, like Professor Lyman said, we should be zoche to celebrate the completion of a third volume as well.
Amen. I think we were hoping to hear from Professor Stampfer. If not, I'm going to ask him to finish the program with what we had planned. I'm sorry to put him on the spot here. Menachem, you can unmute Professor Stampfer for a rebuttal or
I do not like to speak without carefully preparing, and I feel somewhat as a observer on the sidelines, because to write about a great Talmid Chacham the way Rav Dovid does is something I would have always dreamt of doing, but I was told correctly by a teacher who knew me very, very well that that's beyond my abilities. And what I did was to deal with issues that were close, but very, very different. And to be honest, which has its price sometimes, my recent work on Lita and the time of Rav Chaim Ozer is to try and understand the process of disintegration of much of the traditional world in Lita, which Rav Chaim Ozer was trying so hard to reverse and to change its direction. So as an observer, I can only be grateful for the benefit I learned from reading the book. I went out on Friday and I went from store to store in Mea Shearim till I finally found a store where there was a copy left, and I bought it. And as it turned out, I had to give a talk on the process of the secularization in Eastern Europe. So I immediately went to the end of the book because I'm very interested in the question of the rabbinate in Lita. But it was one there where many issues that interest me in terms of rabbinical structure came up. And sure enough, I found a reference. If I had known I was speaking, I would have saved the page number. I think it's 340, maybe not. In any case, it was an observation that immediately after World War I, that the level of observance in Lita, I don't have the page in front of me, was about 25%. And Rabbi Chaim Ozer was dealing with incredibly difficult circumstances, and his achievements are great, even looking at it from the reality of today. Looking at it from the reality of the time, they're even more impressive. But for me, what was important was the fact that Reb Dovid took the trouble to provide me with the quantitative data that I had been looking for. How much can we assume was the community of Jews in Lita observant at the end of World War I? And I will continue, I hope, for a long period to learn from Dovid's careful documentation of the Torah world, and I will try to make my contribution on the sidelines, which has its importance, but it's still the sidelines. So if I can say it, I just want to say thank you, Reb Dovid.
thank you, Shaul. And as was requested, we're just going to finish. Everyone can recite together. We can unmute the Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael.
Achenu Kol Beis
Thank you, everyone, for joining. We should all be able to be together for more wonderful occasions on better days, and agree to Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Dovi.